Welcome to Indigenous Curatorial Collective's panel in partnership with CARFAC, Canadian Artists Representation. The screen is black and from the right, white text moves out and centers. The text introduces the title of the panel, which is Through Challenges We Make Our Own Successes, moderated by Teresa Vander Meer-Chassé. This text then disappears to the left.
Zinsu dochet Nelma Chonsin, Nolek e Teresa Vander Meer-Chassé Chonsin. Dates nichts undicht e. Good day, everyone. My upper Tanana name is Dochet Nelna, and my name I commonly go by is Teresa Vander Meer-Chassé. I'm a light-skinned Indigenous woman with long brown hair pulled up loosely into a bun. My freckles and nose are prominent features on my face. I am wearing a purple tank top that has an exposed part of a tattoo on my left shoulder of music notes. And I am of slender build, sitting at my desk wearing headphones with the Chewbacca mask on the wall behind me. I'm a member of the White River First Nation of Beaver Creek, Yukon and Alaska, and I'm currently calling in from the territories of the Lekwungen peoples, known today as the Esquimalt and Songhees nations, and the Wasanich peoples. I would like to acknowledge and honor the nations whose territories we are each calling in from today. When I call upon our panelists, if you are able, please identify the nations whose territories you are joining us from today. So I will be your moderator for the Through Challenges We Make Our Own Successes panel that features three amazing Northern Indigenous folks, including Elder Shirley Adamson, Lisa Dewhurst, and Melissa Shaginoff. All three of these panelists are storytellers, whether it's through the artwork they create or the exhibits they curate. I've known Shirley for many years and consider her a mentor of mine. She's a member of the Tagish Nation and citizen of Quechan, a former politician who creates art using the name Jura. She's also a public speaker and teaches the Tagish language. She honors the history of her ancestors through the telling of traditional stories, revitalizing language, paintings, fabric creations, and free-form sculptures. Shirley has shown in many galleries and has work held in private collections, as well as the Yukon Permit Art Collection and the Kwalindung Cultural Center. Shirley offered her voice and language for the Tether exhibition at the Yukon Art Center most recently. I've also known Lisa for quite a few years through our shared work in tourism. And a fun fact, my Aunt Jocelyn and Lisa go horseback riding together. Lisa is a member of the Nklakmakmu, I got it close, Nation of Merritt, British Columbia. Her immediate roots are in the interior Salish and Okanagan Nation, but also has ancestry ties to Mexico through her great-great-grandfather, Jesus Garcia. For the past 30 plus years, Lisa has lived in the small community of Teslin, Yukon, with her husband Darcy and two children. Lisa has managed the Teslin Tlingit Heritage Center for over 10 years and has become a steward and leader in the cultural and tourism industry for her community of Teslin and of the Yukon. Lisa has most recently curated the Honoring Our Futures exhibition that is currently traveling to numerous communities throughout the Yukon. Last, but certainly not least, we have Melissa, an artist, curator, and auntie who I had the privilege of meeting in person for the first time this past July. Melissa is Otna and Paiute, there we go. Oh, and I'm going to try this one, from Naidini Kayak.
Yeah, it's pretty good, Naidini Kayak.
Oh yeah, I got pretty close. Chickaloon Village, Alaska. Melissa centers conversation in her art practice, searching for deeper understanding through moments of exchange and reciprocity. She's had a wide range of experience with residencies and is currently in a year-long residency designed by the Nave and a historical space in, Dakakak. Man, I'm so close. Thank you. She's curated and juried at the Anchorage Museum, Alaska Pacific University, and University of Alaska Anchorage, just to name a few. Melissa is also the founding member of Hluk Ai Tas Comics. Oh yeah, okay. I'm getting See, I'm getting better. This is great. Each of these panelists bring forward perspectives that have yet to be heard, and I'm so honored to open the gate for them to share with us today. I'd now like to call upon each of our panelists to introduce yourself in the words you would like us to hear, and perhaps correct those mispronunciations that I've had. I'd also like to ask you to provide us with the visual description of yourself and let us know whose territory you are joining us from. Shirley, did you want to start us off?
That I'm a woman of mixed heritage, certainly favoring my Indigenous roots more than my non-Indigenous roots. I'm proud that I reflect my age. I am in my crone years, and I have very short hair. And I'm sitting and speaking to you from my home, the kitchen of Snow Cottage. Seems to be my power base, and has been for a couple of years, and I'm getting quite comfortable with it. It's I call my little home Snow Cottage. It's where I make art. It's where I find comfort. It's where I connect with myself in a large part as well. Crochet tan quinje Shan aguna jelly Shan kore esua ki aguna ki. I am known as Jura. It's a name that I have inherited from an elder whom I had close connections to my family. And as is the way of our people, we honor that by inheriting those names. So I don't translate traditional names for that reason, is because it does not provide a lot of the backstory on why certain people carry certain names. I am a member of the Tonquichan, which is part of the Tagish Nation here in the Yukon Territory. I did advise, and I am here on my long ago grandmothers, the matriarchs of Tonquichan, on their land. And this land is under the auspices and the protections of the Wolf Clan. It's such an honor to listen to you introduce us the way that you did, Teresa, because I am so proud of all of us, even though it's challenging because we've been instructed and have hidden our languages for so long that it's not, it's a bit of a challenge for all of us to pronounce, but I'm glad that we try. I'm so pleased to be here with this very impressive panel. And I do want to say I have my water, which is here. And I want to, as part of my discussion, to honor those who protect the water and carry water for us. Water not only is life, it is a human right.
Sinicho, thank you, Shirley. Lisa, did you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you. Ganesh Kiyase, you have to sock. My name is Lisa Dewhurst. I am a medium-toned, skinned Indigenous woman. I've got shoulder-length brown hair, and I'm wearing light brown wire-rimmed glasses and a white shirt, and I'm sitting in my home with a blurred background as well because of likely the untidiness that my husband may have left. And I'm joining you today from the traditional territory of the Tuzzin Tlingit Council. That's my husband's homelands. I'm originally from Merritt, British Columbia, and thank you for that introduction, Teresa. My First Nation there is called Inklakahmu, and I have been in Teslin now for just over 30 years, and been really graciously and generously brought into the community and adopted into the Coquitton clan, and who gifted me the beautiful name of Ki'ise, which does refer to the time just before the dawn breaks. So it's a name that I treasure and I honor, and just very, very pleased to be a part of this beautiful culture of my husband's people. So, you know, same as Shirley, I'm very honored to have been invited to share my perspectives and views on this panel. I'm really looking forward to the conversation. And yeah, I just want to say Gunash, thank you very much. It's a great honor to be here and joining you all today.
Great, Sinicho, Lisa, thank you. Melissa, would you like to share?
Yes, Chinan. Willie Jan in Sarota, Melissa Shaginoff sa Setalan, Yudishios Koya Kara Etlan, na itini Ana Kayak Sinsiaden, artist, curator, Anti Golgashna, Chinan Kotan was at Nootlan. It's good to see all of you here today. My name is Melissa Shaginoff. I'm a light-skinned Indigenous and white woman with hip-length, dark brown hair, wearing a gray turtleneck sweater and a beaded flower medallion. And I am in my apartment in Dewhurst with a very messy kitchen in the background. I am a Caribou and Fish Eater clan from Naitiniana, or the Log Over the River, or Chickalon Village. And I'm really happy to be invited here today. I think something special about the way you started us off, Teresa, is you talked about how we're all related. You know, you talked about how we're all connected relationally. You know, and that's why I'm here today, is because I recently met you and talked with you about art and our similarities and our differences. And I think that that's important in the spirit of panels like these, right? So I feel very honored to be, you know, included from the Alaska side, you know, because I think that we share more similarities than differences or arbitrary, invisible borders imposed on us. So yeah, I appreciate being here. I am zooming in from the Dewhurst, from Anchorage, Alaska, and it is on the lands of the Dena'ina people, you know, Dena'ina Ethnena, my cousins and, you know, my family.
Great, Sinicho, thank you, everyone. All right, I think with that being said, I think we're gonna jump in, we're gonna dive in. So like I said, I have some questions all prepped and ready, but we want this to be conversation based. We want it to flow where it will flow. I never really like kind of jumping in and cutting people off. So we're gonna let this happen naturally. But I will start off with the first question just to get us going into the swing of things. So my first question for all of you, and feel free to jump in, and if not, I will call upon you. The first question is, it is widely known that living and working in the North has its challenges. To be an Indigenous artist and curator in the North, you are faced with challenges around access to appropriate funding, inadequate shipping, lack of resources in remote communities especially, scarce infrastructure, and the list goes on. So how have you, or anyone that you've known, overcome these challenges, and what successes came from it? Does anyone want to start with something there? Any little glimmer of something?
I can start. So, yeah, just, I think back when I used to manage the Tlingit Heritage Center, and I often thought about exhibits, and it was while I was working there that I first thought of the Honoring Our Future exhibit. And you know, I at that time, and being in the role of managing the facility, there really was no other time to do anything grand such as an exhibit. The day-to-day activities of managing the center, just it took all of my time, that there was no room for, you know, for this creative outlet of creating an exhibit, and much less, not sure how even how I thought about it in the busyness of that environment. But, you know, it did come to me, and it was, you know, and I'm glad it was an idea that stayed with me throughout, and actually didn't happen until I had moved on from the center. So, so that was a challenge for me. You know, you know, I was working in, you know, the Heritage Center, working in culture and heritage, which is an industry that's near and dear to me. And, you know, but this, yeah, when you're in a role like that, where you're wearing many hats, it's that's a challenge. that was my challenge, and I couldn't overcome it until I actually left my position and was able to work on this exhibit outside of my role at the center. So that was one of my challenges I had, was yeah.
Well, you know, the challenges are many. And really, you know, when I started to think about the question that you asked of us, Teresa, and by the way, it's Shirley that's speaking right now, I realized that they're all equal. They all carry an equal weight, from not having the experience that we need to do what we're doing, because we were never encouraged and we were never supported in these pursuits here in the North. Oftentimes mentors were from either government agencies who didn't understand our culture, our history, our languages, or from mentors from the Indigenous community, but from a different part of Canada, or maybe even a different country, who too didn't really understand the nuances of our history and our languages and what we were trying to capture with our art. That's a little bit of it, all the way through to not having space to exhibit, because it just wasn't something that Northern Indigenous people did. So we didn't have that. And of course, it seems simple to people who live elsewhere, but here in the North and in Indigenous communities, we have no access, virtually no access in some cases, to the materials we need to create our works, whether it's fabrics to fashion our designs and our clothing, or even paint to do our visual arts, musical instruments to create our music, and it just goes on and on. But you know, each one of these challenges, with every Northern Indigenous person who met those challenges, we all found success, and so we're building on each other's success. So hard to not, you know, it's hard to really understand how far we've come with so many challenges in front of us, but we have, and we continue to move forward in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, I think what both of you are saying is so important to hear, you know, because it is a perpetual thing, right? It's not something that there's been we found a solution towards. And these many things, I mean, they're created because of settler colonialism, right? And the sort of bounds that we have to work within, even in our funding structures of like how it is we apply for things, apply to buy supplies, to, you know, to have things shipped out to us, you know, to get 20 glue sticks. You know, I mean, I think that that what would be nice for us to focus on is like, how do we build a system that isn't so reliant on the settler so colonial structures that are barring us from doing these things, right? You know, and how do we invest in a more sustainable way of being able to create the things that we want to create, you know? How do we teach ourselves, you know, to ferment moose brains, you know, for our hides, you know, so we don't have to, you know, get soap shipped in, you know, or, you know, how do we make our own tools, you know, for sewing things, or make our own thread. And, you know, I think that it would be good for us to start thinking too, like how is it that we can actually create these things from the land, from our communities, and from the knowledge that is, you know, maybe already there. We're just not knocking on the right doors to learn them, you know, or to utilizing, you know, the knowledge that elders, you know, might already possess, you know. So it's like, how do we start teasing out what are the things that would create a sustainable sort of, you know, project and way of life to create from.
You know, that is such an important element, Melissa, and I'm glad that you raised that, because I find that not only are the artists themselves finding the answers, but they're sharing them. And that's everything from, you know, the politics behind being able to access our lands and renewable resources again, through the support of our First Nations and our First Nation governments, through the support of language keepers who are helping us to recover and revitalize our languages, which is such an integral part of storytelling and understanding our culture and what it is we're trying to portray as artists. And the support that we get from the audience, and our most appreciative audience, are really our own people who are so thrilled and have voiced that for the first time in a very long time, and for many of them for the first time ever, are they seeing themselves being reflected in what artists are offering, whether it's in dance or in paintings or the creation of songs, all of that, you know, our clothing, the designs that are incorporating cultural elements with contemporary elements. And that's the business of artists. We tell our stories as we see them. And Lisa, you had, you know, I mean, one of the things that I really appreciated about the work that you've been doing recently is to take some of the designs, the clothing, and curating that and turning it into a traveling art show that is appreciated in the smaller communities that generally don't have that opportunity.
Yes, Ganeshjish, thank you. It was very much a highlight, I think, of my career, and time so well spent putting that exhibit together. Ganeshjish for that.
I like just kind of hearing this discussion starting. I want to bring it to that the question about the border that I was actually going to talk about a little bit later in, but I think maybe it's actually important to address it now, because we have, all of us have relationship to the borders. Lisa, I didn't know actually about your relationship to Mexico, which I thought was really interesting. Shirley, Melissa, myself, and I'm sure Lisa as well, like the connection between Yukon and Alaska, and how there's that very artificial border. And for myself as a Beaver Creek, like somebody from Beaver Creek, I can drive and see the border. It's a long cut of trees, and it's just the bizarrest thing to see. I want to pose that to you. How does that artificial border that separates Yukon from Alaska specifically, but please also think of it beyond that, how does that impact your work, your experiences, and your connections with other Indigenous artists and curators? And how can we, as a community, expand beyond that border and reconnect? Because I think some of the things we were talking about of kind of the shared knowledge, it transcends that border. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are around that, and whether or not the border does actually prevent us in doing that transmission.
I suppose for me, it's surely, I suppose for me, obviously, it's the funding. The funding is certainly not, not consistent from country to country, and in some cases from territory to territory, especially since some of the more, some of the communities and the territories are quite isolated. And it's not as simple as putting, traveling back and forth from community to community with a vehicle. But against that backdrop, though, there is a connection amongst us, because although we may not be able to travel as easily between the communities to support each other, but it's to visit family, because the borders are artificial in that amongst the Athabascan Nation, we straddle the Northwest Territories, Yukon, and Alaska. And it's the same with, with the Gwich'in community, who politically are taking steps to encourage that. We certainly, through the Athabascan community as well, know of our connections from Alaska all the way down into southern, the southern states down into Central America, where our traditional stories really are very similar. Our creation stories, our language groups, especially with the Athabascan family, language family, and that's my background, so I'm so familiar with that. But when we begin to capture what we capture, which is really the story of who we are, why we are, and what we are, we draw on that knowledge. And that's what we all share together, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Shirley, that you're touching upon the relatedness of us, and I think that that's kind of, maybe what the borders were meant to do, is to sort of separate us from our power. And our power is that we know each other, that we spend the time to visit and to understand, what people are working on and what they're doing, so you can build coalition and cooperation amongst nations and amongst, clans and different tribes. And I mean, even as in preparation, right, I think we talked about this last time we met, where, I hear, how you all are catching up, and how you are, talking about people, 2 towns away from each other, and how you still know, who they are, right? And that's the way Alaska is too. I like to say it's a big, small place, because I probably know most of the Indigenous people here, and know them, by association through other people, but no families, no names, no different clans. And I think that that's like a powerful thing. And honestly, what makes us very valuable assets to museums, to institutions, to art galleries, is because of our connectedness and our knowledge of each other, right? And I think that the border has created this invisible line that has broken off some of that visiting, some of that time of knowing each other. Not always. People are still try to maintain their family, connections and stuff, but it becomes like this border in our mind that somehow we're different, and those sort of planted seeds of colonialism, I think, can grow, and they can really take over how we even think about ourselves, and so that's why I think that that trying to find ways, even if they're small ways, to break down, borders, maybe it's the next call for art that you do, that you include Alaska in them, from Canada, or from Alaska include Canada, include First Nations, include Inuit. And I think that that those are kind of like the small sort of acts that we can do, to try to change that, because like all these sort of things that have been placed upon us shouldn't be what hold us back, even though they do, right? Funding sources, and monetary differences, and currency differences, and differences in languages. Like, I think we can find ways to sort of, in a small way, kind of like fight against that. Yeah, and certainly, funding organizations, that might be listening to this, or or hearing these words. It's like, if there's ways that you can work around, or if you have the power to open up those borders, really try to expand your mind, whether you're an Indigenous person or not, about the harm that continue to perpetuate these borders does to us, because it does create a harm, in a way, I think.
Well, I find that really interesting too. And when Lisa talked about her connection to Central America from Mexico, I think about, the first thing I started to think when I heard her talk about that were the prophecies of the eagle and the condor that we're now sharing and talking about amongst ourselves. That connection from pre-colonial times in all of our countries. And those stories are still held by knowledge keepers in each of these Indigenous groups. We know how we're connected to each other. And as an artist, I think that I start to see that, and I have a yearning to see more of the art of these distant relatives of ours, and maybe as curators and people who can influence how we present ourselves as artists, maybe that would be another way to bring all of these elements together. Look at the exhibits that, like Tether, for example, and it's clear to me that we have a very unique and similar background in that we live using the materials that we're able to harvest from the natural environment around us. but we also live in an environment that's very similar. Our clothing are incredible pieces of art, because that's the other thing we all share, where we love beauty, and we'll incorporate that in everything, whether it's a pair of moccasins or outer clothing, or just the visuals that we're painting on our, on our tools, and, our bags, everything. And I want to see more of that. And maybe that's some, an element that we have to pay a little bit more attention to. How do we share that? I look at the, at the clothing in Tether that's now, that exhibit is at the Yukon Art Center right now, and we'll move on. But that's what I'm drawn to, is our similarities and how it feels like, even though some of the articles are not from the Yukon, I feel a connection. It feels special and unique, and I feel like I belong when I'm there with that work.
Such great comments, both by Shirley and Melissa. When it brings such strong hope, to be reminded that really that that relation that we all have. And Melissa and I were chatting before the panel began about meeting one another several years back at a conference held in the Yukon, and and it's just like, yeah, that's right, and it right away, it's like, even though we met just briefly years ago, it was like, yes, I do remember you. And all it takes is just a little bit of time together, and you have that connection, and it's really great. And again, it does bring like lots of hope, and it's a really good reminder that that's what we need. That's all we need. Because for me, the borders, all of them, like, it's a psychological border, really. Like, all of a sudden it's there, and oh, that's difficult. This means difficulty. This means going into an understanding and reading through regulations, logistics, all sorts of things to make something happen with the folks across the border, whether it's the southern border or the northern border. And it's like, it's a border, it's a wall, and they've done a good job with that, and they provided a very good name for it, as as a stop to our natural way of being with one another, and of being with our our relatives. Absolutely. And definitely, when I think of my great grandfather, he likely walked up to California in that gold rush era and spent some time there. He left when he was very, very young, I believe around 14 or 15. And then from what we can gather, he boarded a ship in San Francisco and likely docked in Seattle or Vancouver. And, and that was just what he did, and hundreds other just did, and others went south. And it was, it's just this natural way of moving around. And as a result, couple centuries, decades later, here I am, and and here I am in the Yukon now, and it's wonderful, without these borders, without hesitation, I guess, and just a natural way of being, of traveling around without any kind of hindrances and that. So anyways, much appreciate this conversation.
This is great. It's bringing up a lot of things for me. And one thing I think, Shirley, you said right at the beginning, with the issues with the border, and Melissa, you touched on this, as well as with the funding, with funding organizations and bodies, having a very clear separation between the States and Canada, or what is now known as the States and Canada. there's something strange because, like Lisa, you were saying, we had a natural transmission of knowledge, of travel. This is part of us, and for a lot of the time we continue to do so. Maybe not during pandemic times, but you know, it's pretty common that like my grandma would go over to Alaska every other week. You know, it was still something that we kind of naturally did. And to talk about I'm kind of trying to bring it back to like funding, because they're not acknowledging that relationship we have with travel and with the land, I think is also another part of it. We kind of get used to these maps now, and the maps aren't necessarily accurate to what we actually had at one time and we still hold on to today. I think that's a big part of it as well. So a question that I want to pose to you is, a lot of the funding tends to be determined in southern. So in the southern states or in southern Canada, it's not usually done in the north. It's kind of always filtered through, right? So if you had a chance to speak with a southern funding body, anything like that, especially with anything, the needs that we have in the north and how they can actually assist, because we hear them talking about helping all the time, but can we actually see it? What are some things that you would like to say to them to offer insight into the lives of Northern Indigenous artists and curators that might change their perspectives? Melissa, you had a great point of telling folks to actually think about life up here in the borders differently, that, you know, they are artificial in our minds. They aren't a concrete thing, but it's become something that we are prevented with. So if you had the chance to talk to these Southern funding bodies and such, what are some things that you would ask for or you identify as a need through the work that you've been doing? Does anybody want to take on that?
I could start, or Shirley, did you want to start? I just saw you on mute.
I was thinking about that as well when you raised that, Melissa, and sometimes it seems a little overwhelming. You know, I want to say that right up front, because we live in a place in Canada, northern Canada, where people just can't comprehend what it costs to buy food and to apply that to bringing in materials or bringing in support for artists, I think is something that would be further for them to have to reach to understand. But against that backdrop too, though, it's not impossible, because so many of much of industry in the north is government. Federal government is big industry in the north. Territorial government and the Yukon First Nation governments are major industries in the north. And they understand during the establishment of a workforce to populate those industries, they negotiate northern living allowances. They negotiate a lot of these elements into their collective agreements and to their conditions of employment. We have to turn our minds into now, how do we take that argument that's fully understandable to make it acceptable that Indigenous people and Northern people who are not brought in as part of these industries, are deserving of that same kind of funding and those same kinds of initiatives and understanding. How do we do that? And, you know, and I think we can do that. And I think we're closer than we realize. I mean, certainly in our history as Indigenous Northern people, we were reliant on storytelling for the transmission of knowledge, because many of our languages, almost all of our languages, were not written until only maybe 40, 50 years ago. But now we have other information that connects us. We're using a medium right now that's connecting us from different communities on, on a medium, on a platform that didn't exist 20 years ago to everyday people. So we have to, we have to not forget that we have those tools at our disposal and try to figure out how to use them to support what we need to do as artists, as curators, as, supporters of art.
Yeah, and just to sort of, I think to jump on kind of everything that you're talking about, Shirley, right, is that all this kind of this work, this needs to be done by the organizations and the funding institutions. Native people are constantly asked like how to make it work, and to fit within these boxes. And I think that like the power dynamic needs to switch, and I think that in some ways, we're already telling you sort of what needs to be done. There's anytime I apply for things, right, and I don't quite fit within the box, of that fits within the application, I'll send an email and I'll ask like a question, to really look at those questions, look at those inquiries that people are making, as to what is barring them from even applying. What is holding people back from going through that application process, because oftentimes those application processes are very arduous and kind of cater to maybe someone who lives in a city or has like a great internet connection and access to just different sort of examples of what it is that they're looking for, right? So I'd really like to challenge all these sort of funding organizations to look at sort of what Indigenous people are doing and to switch it, maybe rather than asking us to constantly be asking them for money, maybe it's them who needs to learn a little bit about us before that relationship can start. And can these sort of these funding opportunities be looked at as more of a relational sort of like place, that maybe we're going to invest in this project, not just this once, maybe it's going to be over the next 5 years, maybe it's going to be because we're going to spend the time to get to know each other, we're going to spend the time to really understand where somebody's coming from, and not be so based in kind of like what's the next thing. I think that museums can fall into that hole pretty quickly, which is what's the next new thing. It's like, oh, we did this show about this, how do we move on and tell a different story? And it's like, well, actually maybe that story needs to be told again in a different way or expanded upon. So I would like them to start looking at kind of the way that they fund people and the way that they invest in people is more long term, and about kind of like an investment. So that means too that not everything that is awarded should be production based or some sort of evidence based project that's saying like, oh, look at this thing that I did, I finished it, and that's why I deserved the money. Maybe it's about building up a community that is not just one person, it's many people learning, it's many people being affected. So anyway, Jeanette.
That's really great comments, Melissa. And it just, as you were talking, I started thinking about a comment that Shirley had made earlier in the panel, and that was, just in regards to like, we didn't have a lot of mentors in this business, in this industry of exhibits and curatorship and that. And, you know, really like, who did we have to go by? You know, I guess maybe the Roman exhibits or the Greek exhibits or whatever, right? And that was just like, you know, absolutely so foreign to us. So when I think about this question, and when I, going off of what Melissa was, you know, just saying, as opposed to don't be looking at just an end product and a production, but, you know, building that relationship and, you know, sorry, my cat is unhappy behind me. When I think about this, and when I think about when we create exhibits or when we create art, it is just so much more, especially when you look at even, you know, the natural resources that we use in some of these pieces, the preparation and the harvesting of them can take up to a year prior to us even utilizing the materials. So how is that considered in any kind of funding application, you know, at all? Like, you know, you've got to go out on the land, you've got to harvest a moose, you've got to tan the moose hide or whatever, you know, looking for certain materials to make snowshoes, and all those sorts of things factor in that, you know, that you don't just go to the store and buy babiche or whatever. It's all prepared months in advance and sometimes years in advance. So again, and I really, you know, love Melissa's comment of maybe we shouldn't be asking you for funding. You should be asking us, you know, what are those important stories that need to be told, and research those exploration of new exhibits. Include us in the game, include us in your funding planning when you're, you know, organizing your funding pots. Who's defining these parameters? Who's defining the mandate of them or the intent of them? You know, perhaps you should have an advisory board that, you know, assists with that. Like if you know, if we're really, you know, and again, it goes into as well, you know, just this whole truth and reconciliation that we're in right now, like we can contribute so immensely in that, because everything, you know, that I feel that we do as curators and artists is so much teaching involved, and so much of that sharing and sharing in such a vulnerable way, sharing in such a trusting way, that it's giving back so much, that it, you know, it definitely, I just feel like this is our time now, like to be really unapologetic and to be bold and to be like, you know what, I don't fit in your box. And often, Melissa, I've come to a standstill too with certain applications, and I stop and I just, you know, I either write over top of the box and just say, this does not make sense to me. This is not how we view this. You need to rewrite this question. Or I'm not going to be eligible.
I think that happens to all of us.
Yes.
You know, we, as soon as we don't understand a question, we of course try to struggle to answer it anyways, and of course we're not answering it properly, so we're rejected. You know, I can think of the years of rejections and the disillusionment and the frustration and the anger, just for my own part, never mind everybody else's. But it does point back to what you raised at the beginning when you tried to focus us on this question, Teresa, is that if we were able to change something, what would that be? You know, we have to be part of the decision-making process. It's so much of what happens, and I don't know if this is like this in Alaska, but it's certainly something that I'm familiar with in Canada, is that everything is geared to a non-Aboriginal audience. Everything is from a non-Aboriginal perspective. Decisions are made from non-Aboriginal interpretation of what a non-Aboriginal audience wants to hear and see. And there are a lot of preconceived notions that are racist in nature, that have no basis for reality to an Aboriginal audience. So the approach that we take in Canada is to say, okay, we're going to start taking control of this. So what we found almost immediately, and again, I don't know how it works in the United States, Melissa, and maybe you want to speak a little bit about it, is that when we began to focus the funding elements, we found a lot of people that were what we're calling pretendians, or what we're hearing called pretendians. I mean, that's a phrase that's been coined where, oh yeah, I am Indigenous, without any validation from the Indigenous community. It's created a lot of problems for artists across the platforms, recently Indigenous artists. And so that's another element now that we have to work towards. And of course, it's a very delicate path that we have to tread, to say, you have to prove to us beyond just self-identification that you're an Indigenous Northerner, but more importantly, that you're Indigenous. Because there are a lot of Northern artists that are quite successful, but they're not Indigenous. We haven't broken our way through that quite just yet.
Shirley, that does come up in Alaska, and there's even kind of some famous cases too where people have forged documents, and which is like a crime, but they sort of get away with it because who would it be hurting? Just Native people. So, but anyways, I think like the way that organizations and the way that we combat this is that we work in a relational way, meaning that like, oh, so when I'm going to work with this person, I'm going to ask that they bring a community along with them, that they bring elders and youth with every project they do, because I think if you look at sort of the way that you're funding things or the way that you're working with communities, that you aren't relying just on one person, that part of the work that the person with the power, the institution with the power, the gallery with the power has to do is to work with many people, and to not just rely on one person to represent, several cultures, right? And it's like I like to throw it back to them that it's that's your work to do, because I think that you find too that people who are really have strong ties to community, when they have the opportunity to bring a lot of people with them, I think that that's a really great working relationship, and stop putting us in that position where we live in that scarcity. It's like, I think scarcity mindset and the belief that we have to kind of fight over opportunities, it comes from, I believe it comes from sort of Western institutions pitting us against each other. Western institutions creating only one opportunity for a Native person to be, a curator at their museum, one Native person to be given a grant, So how do you change that? At least in the States, that is a big problem, right? There's a lot of sort of one-off and temporary small contracts at a museum. There isn't this investment in entire communities and many people. And I think that's what creates, issues, of people sort of fighting each other and misrepresenting themselves,
I like you using that phrase, investment. We have to figure out how to convince the collective they that we are a good investment. And that's just something we have to do, I think, as leaders in this movement.
I think a lot about, we talked about this outside of the panel as a group at one point, but the use of the North in Canada and the United States tourism push. Yukon is always a primary one for Canada. They're always trying to attract people to go up to the north. Alaska is known as the last frontier in the States. Like, people dedicate their lives, like as soon as they retire, they are on that road north to Alaska, right? So we've gotten so used to that in many ways. And what kind of comes about from that is the governments, the Southern funding bodies, all those kind of things have this understanding already of what we are to them. We are a little ticket, we are a tourism moment for them, things like that, but they're not actually seeing the people that reside in the North. I think that's what we're missing. We get too obsessed, especially in Canada, but I know it's the same for Alaska, obsessed with this magic that the North comes with, but they forget about the people, the humans that actually live there and reside there and work there and create there. And that's something that I wanted to think about in the next couple questions, because we are at an hour. I wanted to see what your thoughts are around, like, we have this kind of conversation between the South and the North and all of the things that are happening there. And it's been very clear of what we need in the North. But I'm wondering what your future thoughts are, what your foresight is, what you would hope to see happen for Northern Indigenous artists and curators. I was going to end on that question, but I want to ask it now because we're already kind of talking about it. So what are your hopes and dreams that you would like to see? Because Shirley and Lisa, you both brought it up, that there really wasn't anyone for you to look at to give examples as Indigenous curators at that time. For myself, I'm looking to you, like I have people now that are doing things that I'm looking at and being able to access that as a kind of an emerging curator for myself. But what are your hopes and dreams for the positions that you're in, your own future, but also for the communities that you represent?
Well, for me, it's, to be a legitimate mentor to help our artists and our people to believe in all that they are and all that they can be, and to proceed knowing that no fight is too small. It's I look at my own career path, and much of my background was in politics, so everything was a fight. And even though I haven't been in politics and active politics in a very long time, I still get comments from people saying, oh, you were so aggressive about this, or you were so mean about this. And I realized that it had nothing to do with me, and they don't know that. It had everything to do with the situations we were dealing with. We had to fight harder. We had to speak louder. We had to support ourselves and to ensure our needs and wants were spoken about. I will never be the diplomat that many people are, because I live what so many Northern Indigenous people live through. And And now I think that, I'm not sure who it was that mentioned, I think it was Lisa, who talked about some of the changes we are realizing now. And I agree that that those people who come after me will not have to fight as hard and have to go through what we're going through to convince funding agencies to support us, to convince decision makers that we know of that which we speak, and to not fight so hard to have their work being seen by a bigger audience and seen in the way that they want their work to be viewed, through an Indigenous lens, really.
I definitely agree with Shirley, with just having that a little bit of a smoother path for sure set out, because again, breaking into the curatorship of anything was like just a dark path. I had no idea which way was up or down. I just like, okay, this is an idea. Where do I start? Where do I go? And thankfully, I had some really great partners that stepped in really quickly to support my idea. And so yeah, again, what do I wish for? And you know, for the future, you know, definitely that we have stories to tell, and they're so worthy of being told. And you know, and again, bringing that whole community and going forward as, you know, as a collective, and sharing those stories and exhibiting them if we so choose to. But again, you know, by us, everything through us, and for us, you know, the Honor in Our Future exhibit has toured now through all of the cultural centers throughout the territory, and everywhere, every community I've gone to set it up, there's lots of excitement, and it looks so different in each space, and the communities bring in extra pieces from their own community to add, and it's just so it's just so lovely. It's just so, it is so community is really what it is. And it brings everybody together, and it's for them. And they know this maker of this dress from Old Crow or the Casca country or Champagne. And it's great. And it's just, yeah, and it starts conversations, and it builds excitement, and it continues to build the pride and love and support that, you know, which is really the basis of what this exhibit was about, was, you know, that pride, love, and support that that mums and aunties and grannies and clan members have for their graduate that's graduating. And anyways, it's, you know, so more stories like that, more of that, you know, because that's just so powerful to me. And you know, and it's not out there, it's not exhibited, it's not, you know, and it's such a beautiful part of our culture. Just one aspect of it, there's many. So definitely, like I said, it's our time to, you know, to be in this game. It's, you know, cultural centers are being built across the country, you know, for this, to share and to educate, and also for, you know, their own citizens to embrace it. So yeah, thank you.
Lisa, you're gonna make me cry. Just like kind of sharing the deep effect that exhibits can have for people, to see themselves represented, and to be able to have the opportunity to talk to their grandmas or their aunties, you know, about these things when they might have not had an opportunity before. You know, it reminds me of that quote by Joe Harjo, right? We will plant We will plant songs where there were curses, right? And like, I think so much about kind of the pain that many sort of collections and museums and institutions had on us, but how we can flip that, and we can change the narrative, and we can also extend the story of all those objects and all those like cultural heritage pieces, you know, and recontextualize their story, you know, continue their story through us and through our connection to them, you know, because I think that there's a lot of power in that, you know. And you know, that's what I want to see, you know. It's like I want to see more Native people feel the power and the privilege that they deserve to have within these places, because 95% of their exhibits and shows and content is all about us, right? So we deserve to have a power within that, you know, and we should be able to control those narratives, you know, because when we do control them, we bring everyone with us. And you know, it's like, I think too, we have such a fresh outlook on all of these things, on all of these sort of art projects and these exhibits that for the most part hasn't been told, or been told in a very small way, you know. I'd like to challenge any institution or museum hearing this and just think, if you were to give it all over to us, you know, what we would create with it. You can't even imagine, because it hasn't been done, but I tell you, it would be brand new and it would be very wonderful. But anyways, I'm getting all flustered. But no, I really want to see more of what Lisa just described, is you know, is families, you know, being there together and celebrating, and really returning to the publicness of our ceremony and our connection, you know, to the things that we make, because those things were always very public. Our artists were always very public. We all know who the best sewer is. We all know, you know, who we can learn the songs from, right? So let's return that publicness to our projects, you know, because there's the power in people feeling recognized. So.
Tanicho, that was great. I'm so happy. Yes, I would love to see non-Indigenous institutions being led by us. Like, we just take them over. I love that idea. Anybody out there, if you want to give over your institution, please do. We're ready. We're willing. I love it. That is awesome. I love that idea. And I'm happy I asked that question now, because I think it's something that we're all in agreement. You know, we're four very different people. We have different experiences throughout life, but I feel like the passion is there. It's very similar. It's rooted in story. It's rooted in relation, like our relationality. Just all of those kind of things connects us, and I really appreciate you all sharing your thoughts on that. I just wanted to run through a little bit of some notes that I've been taking, a little bit of a summary, and I wanted to offer you one last chance to share some thoughts on those before we wrap up. But first, I wanted to kind of think about the challenges. We were talking about that earlier on, that through challenges, you know, even the title of this, through challenges we make our own successes, because despite all of the things that become roadblocks for us as Northern Indigenous artists and curators, we're more than capable of overcoming those, which I think is also really powerful, because we have the resources of community. I mean, I'm just thinking of like, yeah, just even being in Beaver Creek, you know, like you forget something at the grocery store, you're gonna have to text your cousin to bring it up the next day, you know, like those kind of things. Like, we're not without resources, and it's more of people resources and our relations. I think that is what sets the North apart from the rest of the United States and Canada. I think we rely a lot on our relationality in that way. Some of the challenges that we identified was today we were talking about how we don't necessarily fit into the boxes that funding organizations and institutions tend to try to filter us into. We do not fit that box. So how can that box be changed? Well, we kind of offered some thoughts in regards to having us sit actually on the jury tables of those applications to actually be a part of developing funding opportunities for Northern Indigenous artists. Right there, you already solved those issues. We also talked about how we actually have to end up competing against one another for very few positions, like Melissa identified. I most certainly have had that experience of, there's one position at a non-Indigenous led institution and all the young Indigenous folks are trying to go after that internship. It's not a good feeling when you're trying to compete with people that you love and that you want to support as well. Like what I've found from the conversation that you've all shared is that we are connected and it's important for us to uplift one another. So when we have to compete against one another, it's not a good thing for us. It doesn't actually fit in the way that our lifestyle is. Another thing was we kept talking about like this colonial mindset of the border like being this strict, harsh separation when it really isn't. It never was before, and it still isn't for us now. It's more of changing that understanding and actually viewing that there is no border. You know what I mean? It'd be so nice if people didn't think about it. We also talked about how funding is very inconsistent between regions, but also internationally between countries, which does cause a lot of delay in those opportunities being shared or like those knowledges being shared. Anything like that tends to kind of get stopped because of funding when they think in that way. I wanted to offer it up to you guys if there's anything else that you wanted to share in that moment, if there's any more thoughts in the challenges section, little summary that I've just done.
What I would like to say is that I want to keep this conversation going. Mm-hmm. I think that, and to open it to other Indigenous Northerners, and to begin to lay out the groundwork for continuing conversation so that those people we know who need to be a part of the conversation, we can find focus on that. Who do we need here besides ourselves? But first, I think we can start by saying, bringing other Northern Indigenous people into this conversation. We can begin to identify what we see the issues are that we need to approach first, so that we can look at who else we need to be a part of that conversation. Because we hear people who want to help, but if we don't know how to tell them how they can help, having them there is great, but we're not going to make any progress as quickly as I think we could. I mean, I was so thrilled, and I feel privileged to be part of this conversation with you three women, and I just the opportunity is something that I'm very grateful for, and I think should be shared with other Northern Indigenous people.
I'd also say too that that we do have to come up with like a way to direct people on how to work with us, right? So institutions and museums and galleries and funding organizations, they need to create those positions, or those contracts in which we can do that. It's like, how do they start by first looking at themselves, and find out what opportunities can they create for us in order to change their structures, right? And like I feel like I do a lot of work in this kind of teaching space, and for me, it feels like I'm just trying to teach empathy and perspective taking. But I think too that that it is like heavy on one person's shoulders and can be fairly exhausting, And so it's like, how do you view, making these large changes, these even these like changes within paradigms, how do you make that part of your job as well? Even as a non-native person, how do you do that? How do you change the North to Alaska trope, right? How do you counter the idea of Alaska being the last frontier, right? How are you helping me do that? So it's not just on me to do it. So it's not just on Lisa to do it. So it's not just on Shirley to do it, or Teresa, right? How do you be good relations to us? Maybe that's a little abstract, but that's how I feel about it.
And I just thinking about the challenges again, just the support, like when I reflect back again about, wanting to do an exhibit, but being so busy in my position, within a cultural center, which, really it would have been an ideal place just to have this all unfold in front of me, but you can't when you're, running and, like I said, wearing many hats. And then I think too, that challenge, like, yes, it's so important, the exhibit as an education tool, but at the same time, when you're looking for funding, when you're trying to gather, put together an exhibit, like constantly explaining yourself, constantly defending yourself as an Indigenous person, it just like, you just get to that part of the day where you're like, no, I just can't do that, so that really is a challenge, when you're working through these processes, and the lack of partnerships, the lack of awareness that museums and galleries have, that's a huge challenge. It's in this day and age, and for all of the work, all of the work that has been done, and like Shirley said, she's been in the political field for so many years, and the battle scars that she's probably come through with that, but yet again, that awareness, and it's removing that status quo that's out there, even with the museums and galleries, and that it's stepping out of that comfort zone, like just be uncomfortable for a bit until you get to know us, and then we'll take over.
Oh, I still love that idea. That sparks a thing that a friend of mine, I met him a long time ago. He started a campaign called Museums Are Not Neutral, and I love it. I love that phrase, just the fact that somebody finally said it, and we've been saying it for a long time, but it's kind of more in the forefront. And I hear you, Lisa, about more meaningful partnerships need to be developed. Like you said, we do have a lot of cultural centers, heritage centers, learning centers kind of popping up all throughout the North, especially in the Yukon. I know Alaska has some as well, friendship centers, where Indigenous folks leading, offering programming to their own community, things like that are being developed there, but there's still some barriers. The fact that Lisa, you said it, and I marked it down here many times, that you wear more than one hat. And I think some folks just don't understand that about the North. I say it all the time. If you're working for an Indigenous government, or if you're an Indigenous artist or curator or anything like that, you wear all the hats. Like, you're in charge of everything. If you're an Indigenous artist, you are not just the artist, but you're also your admin, you are your social media expert, you are your grant writer. Like, people don't get that. And same with being a curator. You are everything. You might not even have a preparator. I'm going to repeat that just for all of the curators from the South that don't understand that. You might not have a preparator or even a space to exhibit in, and you are a Northern Indigenous curator. So that means you have to do it all. And people don't understand that. But I really am happy and grateful that you all spoke that, shared that perspective, because I think it's very important to emphasize those points, that you wear all of the hats. I also wrote down, you brought up the fact that our artwork takes longer. And Shirley, you mentioned just getting paints. You know what I mean? Like, even just ordering paints online to get up to Whitehorse because all you have is dollar store. You know, it's just, that's the way of our life. And it's not just that, but it's also Melissa with the harvesting and tanning moose hides. Like, I'm totally right there with you. I understand that whole process. Everything that we do takes a lot longer. So there needs to be some kind of understanding there with funding bodies, governments, and organizations, that our lives take a lot longer. Just everything does. Our artwork, our curating, any other position, those kind of things are put into it. And honestly, I think it comes out to become more meaningful work as well, though, because you dedicate so much time to it. The other thing that I wanted to point out in regards to payment considerations, because I didn't really ask that question, but I kind of did. Shirley, you brought up the idea of living allowances. And I thought about that really quite a bit while you were all chatting, because I was thinking of, for example, you know, we were talking about that border. People come up to be the customs workers or the border agents, and they get funded to come up to the North, to stay for a little bit, and then they get funded to leave. We don't get that. We don't get living allowances for those kind of things. We're just there. That's our home. You know, nobody's paying us to be at our home. And I think that needs to be thought about with the funders. I know they wanted to bring up the payment considerations. So I think that's a huge part of it, is even just thinking about gas in your grant. You know what I mean? Like, a huge part of your grant is going to be just gas receipts and travel. Like, those kind of things actually are a part of our daily lives, and they need to be considered when we're actually applying for funding. And funding bodies need to actually respect and understand when an Indigenous curator or artist is applying for these things, that they mean it, that what we're telling them is true. I think is another strange part. Lisa, you brought that up, of like trying to prove your point to these funders. I think it's odd that there would even be a questioning. I wanted to open it up again if there's any other comments that you wanted to raise around payment considerations or anything of that sort for this panel.
It's always difficult to value art, but our art has value. Civilizations, when they go to war, the first things they do is they begin to destroy art libraries. And it may not have been so evident for us, but that's what we're coming through. And it's up to us to value ourselves as artists, whichever element we're playing, whether we're making the art, performing the art, or curating the art. But we have to value ourselves so others know how to value us as well.
Just that last comment of Shirley's is, you know, I just really sitting with that because I think it's such an important one of, it's hard to value art because it is so personal. It is so holistic. It encompasses our whole being when we're in the element of producing it.
Yeah, I think that Shirley's last comment is really important. And, you know, we know the value of ourselves and our culture, you know, and I think we spend a lot of time trying to convince other people of its value. And I really just would hope that they would just trust us, you know, and that might mean not understanding and just trusting us.
Tinicho, that was great. Thank you so much. I wanted to end it. We're right on time, actually. We're doing pretty good. I wanted to end it with that last question I had asked about kind of the hopes and dreams and the future, forward thinking. Everything you mentioned was the relational, the want to experience true mentorship, to be a mentor, seeing the pride of a community when your exhibition is there, or for them to see their own work within the exhibition. You talked about creating a smoother path for younger generations, so they're not having to deal with these hurdles. You also talked about the emotional reactions that exhibition can play to our communities and to us as individuals, and how it can relate to our healing as well. All of those things cannot be put behind glass. Was something I just wanted to say. It can't be put behind glass. It's everything that you've shared. The words that you've shared are the strength of community, are our relationality. We keep saying that word, but it is very true. And I'm so happy I picked the three of you to be on this panel, because I really felt like that would come through, and it certainly has. And on that note, I just want to say, Tsini Cho, thank you so much for being here on behalf of the Indigenous Curatorial Collective as well. Thank you for being a part of this panel. It's been wonderful. I hope we chat soon again. And yes, surely we will continue this conversation into the future. And I hope anybody that's watching, please reach out to us. We want to continue this conversation. I think it's really important. And the four of us are very passionate people. And yeah, I just want to say thank you again. Good.
The panel is now ended. The screen is black again, and CARFAC's logo and ICCA's logo appears on screen. CARFAC's logo is many small circles that form a C shape on top, and beneath it has text that reads, CARFAC National in whites. The ICCA's logo is on the right. The logo is the letters I, C, C, A, written in white text vertically. Both logos then disappear.